Well, it's a dank, grey January morning on High Ash Farm, but Chris Skinner, no shortage of bird life.
No, Matthew, it's a brilliant time of the year to watch some of our native birds and some of the ones that migrate here, because the foliage is all off the deciduous trees, and that gives us a real advantage. Many of the crops here, the overwinter wild bird seed mix, which is right beside us, has died down. And also that exposes lots of birds. And what we're doing this morning, a little bit of a treat. A couple of weeks ago we visited a woodland bird hide and sort of got acquainted with birds like nuthatchers and all the tit species. And this is a farmland bird hide. We're right in the middle of a huge section of agricultural land, and with a panoramic view over the farm. And a lady just walking past. We're on one of the permissive walks, but we're now going to dart round the corner and hop in the hide, and then we'll sit there quietly for a few minutes, and fingers crossed we'll get some treats. But you never know what you're going to see. So there we are.
Talking of treats, you've actually brought some bird food here.
Yes, I have. There's mixed peanuts and grains and seeds, some black sunflowers, and half a bucket full. And that's the bait for the hide. And I can see some rooks flying right over where that hide is. It's carefully secreted beside a hedge, very close to a public walk here at the farm. And hopefully it's all camouflaged and invisible. And I'm just going to put a bit of extra food on. I can see some hungry looking rooks in the distance on the top of that oak tree. And they're watching us very carefully. But fortunately somebody's just walked past, and that kind of draws their attention away from two very suspicious characters, which is you and I, which are going to walk into the hide now. Now look at this, you wouldn't realise there's a hide here, is it?
The hide is hidden.
It is hidden, it's a hiding hide. Look in front of us.
Oh my word, oh that's a deer.
Yeah, wow, only about 50 yards from us.
The outline there clear.
Yeah, Chinese water deer, that's their typical trick. To stand stock still and you would not just walking away very slowly now, not at all worried by us. That's a lovely sort of start to our visit. So one mammal and a few birds already. Come on, let's get in this hide out of the drizzle.
A good start to our latest countryside podcast at High Ash Farm.
Just put some food on the big table here. Open the door. And in we go.
Well, we've been sitting in the hide now for about 10 minutes or so. We've had a fine display of robins and blue tits and various other birds as well. You've just spotted a terrestrial creature.
I have, Matthew. Just on the fallow plot right in front of the hide is a fox. And he's just skulking across. They do move about in daylight at this time of the year. A lot of the young foxes have left their natal territory, the area where they were born, and they get pushed out by either mum, vixen, or dad, the dog fox, and they have to find their own territory because the vixen will be giving birth in a month or so, or most of the vixens, they're mated already. And I wondered why the birds in front of us were all a bit skittish. There's a lovely flock of linnets coming down and feeding on the ground. There's some teasels about 20 yards away, and a lot of the seed has been thrashed out by two storms that we've recently had in the previous week, and the seed's on the ground, and so it's ideal and easy feeding for those linnets to stock up on some nutritious teasel seed. And in front of us is a large Heston bale. It's about 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, and I've put some grains on that, and we've just got a beautiful male reed bunting with a very distinctive white moustache and a black head, and eventually the little black area will extend down the back of the head and onto the breast as well.
They're all too rare these days, aren't they?
Yes, read all the bunting species, and a little bit further down the hedge there's a dozen or so yellowhammers. It's a little bit early in the season for us to see yellowhammers close up at the hide here, right in front of the window, because they don't really gather in numbers until mid-February, even later than that, and they stay here for about 8 weeks before they all go off in pairs and set up their territories. But the birds I'd hoped to see haven't yet arrived, the rooks and the jackdaws, and they're already courtship feeding. So the males are feeding the females. There's lots of food here, and it's a good time of year for rooks, crows and jackdaws, because winter's there. Plenty of food time, if you like it. They're not affected in the same way by other birds, that period we call the hungry gap. This is a time of plenty for them because they can easy access to soil invertebrates, to worms, to all the creatures that live in or on the soil, and of course farmers' grains, because farms are still planting their cereals at this time of the year. It does make me smile because there's lots of old farming adages sort of cursing rooks and crows and jackdaws, and one of them is the kind of farmer went to sow, one for the rook, one for the crow, one to die and one to grow. And crows have got mentioned in that, although they don't really eat much grain. They will do occasionally, but rooks with that really long beak, about 3.5 inches long, sort of dagger sharp, they probe down where farms have drilled their grain, and they can actually sense where the seed is on the ground, just covered up.
We've seen rooks, haven't we? But they've not come close.
No, normally they'll come in on the hide. That's because we've come to the hide a bit late on in the morning, but they're in breeding plumage now, and you can always tell the difference between a rook and a crow and a jackdaw, because jackdaw's by far the smallest. It's got that grey cap on its neck and a little black patch right on the top of the head, and they're one of the smaller members of the three lowland crows. Then the next one up the scale is the rook. It's about 18 inches from tip of beak to tip of tail, and glossy plumage and baggy trousers. These feathers come down on the legs, and they're really gregarious birds. Like the jackdaws, they love living together, and you get those wonderful rookeries. And on the west side of Hirsch Farm, there are 2 rookeries there, one very traditional and one much newer, and there's about 50 nests in one and 150 nests in the other. And just on the west side of Hirsch Farm, right by the A140, Dunstan, there's a really large rookery there of 300 or 400 nests, and they just love being together. It's one of those birds that have declined hugely from the sort of mid-1900s, 1950 onwards, up until the 1980s. They declined by about half, really, in numbers. Particularly so in the southern half of the UK. In the northern half of the UK, you get really large rookeries, up to 1,000 nests on one site. So they love being together. And the third one is the carrion crow. It's a little bit larger, but only marginally. It doesn't have that white patch around the base of the beak. Much shorter, stouter beak. And the plumage is kind of duller as well. The rook is very glossy, particularly if you see it in sunlight. And lovely, lovely birds, though, and they're quite solitary. So the other old adage is one rook is a crow and lots of crows are rooks. But that doesn't really help much. But usually you can sort of decipher them once you see them all regularly. You can easily tell them apart. But sitting here a year ago, I did have a shock because somebody walking on Hirsch Farm and said, Chris, in amongst your rooks, crows and jackdaws feeding on the overwinter wild bird seed mix, there was a raven. And I thought, well, he's had one too many gin and tonics, and I was very rude.
It was raven mad.
Yes. And I was very dismissive because I thought, I've been there all these years and I've never seen a raven. I don't think I'm ever going to see a raven. And
They're more at home in Scotland, aren't they? In
yes,
Wales.
they are, yes. They're birds of desolate places. It's by far the largest member of the corvid family. And I had to eat my words, and I had to say sorry because I was sitting in this very hide, and I heard this strange croaking noise. I haven't heard anything even remotely like it before. And very slowly, over the top of me, being accompanied by two carrion crows and a jackdaw, a little flotilla round it, all four of them flying together, was unmistakably a raven. And I bit my lip, and I made sure I found the walker and apologised, and he sort of smiled at me. And now they're certainly not common, but they are getting more and more into lowland Britain than we'd seen before. They basically got shot out of it, almost to extinction in southern half of the country, and it's a bird of wild places, particularly up in Scotland, coastal Wales. Sometimes if you have a dolphin come up on the beach, a dead dolphin, or even a whale in the northern part of the country, you'll have large numbers of them come and feast on the dead carcass. And of course, it's one of the food birds that's managed to get its own name into the dictionary. If you're very, very hungry, it's a bit like my tummy rumbling this morning, you're ravenous to eat like a raven. And so I love it, yes. So look at that, Matthew. Beautiful male chaffinch right on the hedge beside the hide here, in breeding plumage. Is thinking of coming in. The hide is very quiet on the feeding table. I think everybody's had breakfast and waiting for lunch now, so it's the afternoon feed. But cracking bird, very underrated. It's one of our commoner birds, suffering a lot with a fungus at the moment, particularly on the legs. It's got a long scientific name, but beautiful birds, and some tits still coming in, and we're right on the edge of a newly planted area of woodland which runs right behind the hide here. And I don't often admit to making big mistakes, but I love new woodland. It's about 2 hectares, and the children of Notre Dame School, they have their own wood here at the farm called Notre Dame Wood, but 12 of them flew to China. And they approached me, they know I'm a sort of wildlife-friendly farmer, and said, we'd love to carbon offset our flight to China just for the 12 children, and we will supply and plant the trees beside your new area of woodland and make it about 6 acres instead of 5. So they planted an acre extra up on good agricultural wheat land, and I was very pleased to do it at the time, but subsequently I've had to think it was carbon offsetting for those 12 children only to fly to China and back, and they worked out they needed an acre. But the galling bit is, and I agreed to it, to leave the woodland untouched for 105 years. And that just makes you think, our modern way of living, how much carbon we produce. There were 308 people on that flight, but we just carbon offset 12 children's flight there and back to China.
And that's an acre of woodland for a century.
Yes, to offset that. And our local airport is just starting out new routes all over the sort of Europe and new destinations. And because holidays and transport and leisure is a hugely important part of humans' life. And I think it's something we have to look at. But I've learnt the hard way, because this was my own land, and I've donated it for a century. But I love woodland, don't get me wrong, and that's the ability to sit in this hide. The woodland is just behind us, and look at that. I don't say lunch, Matthew. A hen pheasant's just arrived on the bird feeder in front of us. Matthew is 4 feet away from a hen pheasant.
And she's oblivious to our presence.
Absolutely, yes. Almost looks like a different species to the male, Matthew, because cock pheasants are very gaudy. They sort of strut about the place with their flamboyant plumage, and of course the female pheasant has to incubate her eggs on the ground, so she's got to be as inconspicuous as is possible, and that's exactly what she is. But she's sitting 4 feet from us. She's having sunflowers, wheat barley and triticale for a late breakfast.
Thick carpet of leaves. It's a very damp morning. We're outside again now, Chris, into the fresh air, and we're in some of the woodland here with a bit of rain falling.
Yes, it's always welcome at this time of the year. Getting towards the end of January now, February coming up. There's another one of those farming adages.
Oh, here we go.
Yes, I know, I'm full of them, aren't I? But it's quite true with the month that's now coming, February. One of the old farming sayings is February fill dike black or white, and that means it's usually quite a wet month, whether it's rain or snow, which then melts, and the dike is a kind of ditches on farms that join into rivers, usually the drainage ditches. And just as we got out of the car, I was watching a couple of squirrels, and they seem to think these are grey squirrels. They seem to think spring's round the corner, and they were chasing each other around the base of a tree over there at great speed.
They should be asleep though, shouldn't they?
Yes, well, not really. They're pretty active. Red squirrels tend to be much quieter in the winter months, although they do stay active. And this is a brilliant area of woodland for seeing deer. We've just driven through part of it. There's 4 roe deer resident in this area of woodland, and I was hoping we was going to catch a glimpse of them, but because it's drizzly and they're really well camouflaged, we weren't lucky. But we've had a couple of storms, as I mentioned earlier, on the farm in the week, and the second one, Jocelyn, named by the Irish Meteorological Service, has brought down some more trees, and in front of us is an ash tree. I've already cut it up. The top's way away up there, all chopped up, ready to make a bug bank.
Lots of sawdust.
And the tree is a hollow tree, but the ash tree was still completely alive. The base of it is hollow, the rest of it was sound. And I've suddenly noticed that several ash trees are just falling over when they shouldn't be. This area of woodland is full of ash, and of course ash is quite important to me as it's high ash farm, and so I've got a long relationship and planted lots of them on the farm.
But in the last decade we've all heard about the disease, haven't we?
Yes, ash dieback, chalara or chalara, it's got several pronunciations, and it's devastating the canopy of the ash trees. They grow up, and then you can always tell the ash trees that are affected because they try and sort of compensate for their growth tips being killed with the fungus. It's a fungal disease, and they send out lots of shoots all the way up the trunk and up into the canopy. And I'm just looking around to see if we can see that one there. There's an ash just through there. It's about 70 feet tall, and that's affected. You can see all the way up the trunk, little sticks are coming out of the trunk, whereas they should be up in the canopy. So it's very uncharacteristic of them to do that. So this one's just come over by the roots, and I think this is number 5 ash tree I've chopped up in recent weeks, windblown. And I wondered why they kept coming over, because ash dieback usually affects the part above the ground. The New Year's growth in particular seems very susceptible to the ash dieback. And I've started to look at the other end of the ash tree, and here it is, Matthew. It was a perfectly live green ash tree, and all the sap is still up in the top of the tree. Sap started to rise, and all the roots have completely rotted. And the fungus has come down, not from just in the canopy, it's come right down into the root system. And this is the roots, look, and I can poke my finger down a root. It's just mush. Look at that. It's completely rotten. Yeah. And so the tree has lost all its support with the root system. And you can see if we can actually look underneath the whole stump. There's nothing living down there to support the tree. it's just died on its feet, so to speak.
So the first decent strength of wind has taken it away.
The characteristic sign of this, we know all what the lesions look like up in the canopy, but there's no root ball. It's just the trunk has come over, and this was a pretty large ash tree. It was about 30 inch diameter, I suppose. And as I said, the trunk was all solid, and we can go up to the top, which is about 50, 60 feet away from us, and you can actually see the areas that are affected, and that's the most common sort of exhibition point, if you like, of where you look for ash dieback. And we'll just go over here, and usually you'll see some of the growth near the top, and it's discoloured, and so you get lots of dead twigs. Here we are. There's one here, it's just snapped off, and I can do that, and it's completely dead. So it's affected right at the canopy up in the tree. This one here is dead as well. You can actually see the different colour. It changes just there, and I can just do that, and it snaps and no sap in it. And that's characteristic of it. But to see what it's done down at the root end, the butt of the tree, as we like to call it, it's quite astonishing. So that's new for me. Not seen that happen before, and because 10 years ago it was a new kid on the block, ash dieback. I think first discovered almost in Norfolk, in Ashwellthorpe, and subsequently I planted a lot of ash trees in new woodland here at the farm, only to lose nearly all the young ash saplings, so it was a really sad time.
They're dying youngest first, aren't they?
Yes, they do, yes. Oh, so look down there, Matthew. Muntjac deer. Only like 60 yards from us. There we are, talking. Can you see it?
I've lost. Where are we?
You're lost.
I'm lost. I'm a man lost.
It's.
We saw Chinese water deer earlier.
Yes, we did. There it goes. You
Yes.
get see what I mean?
Yeah, as soon as he moves.
Yes, as soon as they move, they attract attention, and that's
Not your roe deer.
No,
though.
that's what I was trying to say. We've only got two proper native species of deer in the United Kingdom. One's the red deer, which is the largest British land mammal, and the other one is the roe deer and Chinese water deer, and this one in front of us, a muntjac, both introduced species. So there we are. So beautiful deer, the roe deer. I love them to bits. And some people think fallow deer is a native species, but it was present before the last ice age, then became extinct, and we think the Romans reintroduced fallow deer into Great Britain. They started in Ireland and then moved across into the UK here. So there we are, nice little tree. Right, we'll head back to the farm now and get you dry out of this persistent drizzle this morning. It's a real drizzly old day.
Before I divest myself of the Wellington boots, I think we've got some emails.
We have some emails and some questions, so let's hop in the truck here, in the dry, and see what's been sent.
Yes, it is raining now, so we've made a good decision here coming into Chris's farm truck. And Marion, hello to you. Thank you for your email, Marion Lindsay. I'm feeding the birds like there's no tomorrow at the moment, she says. We give them various different things, but they love the peanuts the most. And they've been getting through a feeder's worth of these every day. My question is, at what point in the year should we stop feeding the birds peanuts, and when should you begin again?
All right, well, I don't actually stop feeding until I get well into the nest season. It is true that inexperienced young birds could feed whole peanuts if times were hard in finding sufficient food for the youngsters, the fledglings in the nest, and they could choke on whole peanuts. I use peanut little kernels all chopped up, usually at that time of the year, but generally birds are quite sensible. They're not bird-brained, as we sometimes call them, and they will feed the proper food to their youngsters, which is really caterpillars. So dry food is pretty much of a problem for them because birds can't carry water in their beaks. So their fledglings are completely reliant on the right sort of food, which that time of the year, April and early May, will be caterpillars, usually of the winter moth and other moth caterpillar species as well. So that's how they get round it. But generally, there's enough natural food after the hungry gap has finished once you get into April and May, and that's why most birds time their nesting attempts at that time of the year when there's sufficient food for them.
Hello to Nick Warner and to Ray Dumpleton, who are both enjoying the podcast, and it's good to know that you both are. And what have we got here? We've got, John and Veronica, our Somerset correspondents.
Yes.
They've been keeping us up to date with the nest boxes that they've been putting up. And these are particularly for sparrows, aren't they?
Yes, I'll just open up the
there's a
picture.
photograph with the
look
letter.
at this. They've erected a real des res there.
That's like the Savoy Hotel
Exactly.
of sparrow boxes.
And I've done a design for them and the measurements and posted it off. And they've done a superior model with 6 nest holes in. And they've already seeded the nest holes, which sounds a really odd thing to do. But they've found some loose hay and they've hung it out of the nest. They might need to do it a couple more times if the nest material disappears into the hole. But sparrows are really messy nesters, parts of the birds of the world, other birds, the weaver bird family, and they're all untidy nesters, so to have scruff coming out the nest holes there is helps to kind of attract birds into those nest holes. Well done, that's a brilliant des res.
Hello and greetings to Elizabeth Peckett, who I'm reliably informed turned 90 recently, and they are avid listeners to the podcast, the family, and Elizabeth especially. And we've had a note, Elizabeth, from your granddaughter Holly and daughters Jane and Helen. They say that Elizabeth looks forward to the podcast so much, and we wondered if you could say a happy birthday to her, please.
Of course. Happy birthday, Elizabeth. 90 years young. What about that? Congratulations and warm regards from High Ash Farm.
Vaughan Roberts says, Dear Chris, thank you for continuing to inspire us and all others to celebrate the wonderful countryside. And he goes on to say, I've got a query about sparrow boxes. We're back to that. 2 years ago, I made a swift box, which, although not used by swifts, is now occupied by house sparrows. I'd like to provide more sparrow residences and was wondering if you could send me the design for your sparrow nest box. I could make another swift box, but I suspect that your design will be superior. I've not played any calls to attract the swifts, as I do not want to pinch anybody else's swifts, and I've now had the tricky situation that I would not want the swifts to evict the sparrows. We hope to come over to High Ash soon, but please can you guarantee that we will hear the lesser spotted woodpeckers? And Vaughan, who lives in our neighbouring county in Lincolnshire.
Wow, that's a bit of a tall order because we do hear them drumming here. 2 species of woodpeckers are regular drumming birds, if you like, the great spot woodpecker and the lesser spot, both of which are in this area of woodland we're sitting in this morning, and all around us are giant sweet chestnut trees with lots of holes in, and many of those are made by the largest of the 3 species of British native woodpecker, and that's the green woodpecker. But to hear lesser spot drumming, you have to kind of be a regular visitor to areas of woodland at the farm where there's permissive access through the area of woodland, and they drum right up at the top of the trees. You might hear them, and to see them, they're red list species. To see them is a red letter day because they're tiny, not much bigger than a nuthatch in size. So there we are. So fingers crossed on your visit, you can hear them. Good time is towards the end of February.
Anna James lives in the middle of Suffolk, but she loves her visits to Norwich and used to live at Ditchingham, which is on the border. And she enjoyed the recent episode recorded there,
yes,
which
we
wasn't
did.
long ago. And Anna says, I have visited the farm as well to walk with friends. I've now told all my friends and family about the podcast and what a delight it is. Please keep doing them, says Anna.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we'll do our very best to keep going. So there we are.
And we've got Chris Murray, who's wishing you a happy new year. Just thought, Chris, I'd let you know what happened with regards to the bees that were in the dovecot and the nesting box. The bufftails didn't stay too long, but the honeybees stayed until it became too cold for them. Having thought they were a nuisance in the beginning, they were a bit scary flying over my head. We became good friends, and hopefully they may return. Do I need to clean the dovecot, though? It will need dismantling.
No, you can leave the dovecot as it was. The bufftails won't have actually left. All of them will have died, apart from the mated queens, and they will have flown off somewhere to hibernate over the winter months, and then it would be very unlikely that they come back to the same spot where they were reared. And as for the bees, the honeybees in there, they may still be there. Remember, they become distinctly inactive during the winter months until things start to flower again, and so you don't need to actually clean the dovecot out in case the honeybees are still there.
And Chris goes on to say that there's a marvellous spot for mistletoe, which was a topic of a recent podcast, near Waxham, next to the seaside in Norfolk. I've noticed quite a lot on the way to Waxham. Poplar trees, I think, spherical mistletoe. They are a delight. And just before we sort of head off into the sunset, Toad Watch. Very important groups all around the country, particularly where toads breed and they migrate. And I know this is a big thing for you as well, Chris, that toads need protecting. And Toad Watch, we need to say that what a good job they're doing, don't we? Because there are organised toad patrols to protect them when they cross roads.
Yes, because they're so vulnerable, and that's coming up to toad patrol time, believe it or not. They come out of hibernation end of January, up around Valentine's Day. That's a good period to see them. They've come out of hibernation. They're very sort of sluggish to start with, and they walk across roads rather than hop. And when you've got a large curb the other side of the road, if the road crosses their territory, they have a job to get back up. And so toads are really important to me. There was a lady here who's a livery here for many, many years, Daphne Howes. Unfortunately, Daphne's no longer with us. She lived at Trowse, and every morning and evening she walked up White Horse Lane with a bucket and would collect toads. And she'd even lift drain covers up and hoik them out of the storm drains and move them across the road to the safety of the marshes there down at Trowse, where the playing fields are. Sterling service for all those years, and when I see them crossing the road, I help them across as well. And they are so vulnerable, and I've done the same down at Dunwich as well. They're natterjack toads crossing the road there on the little road down to Dunwich where the ship pub is, and help them there as well. And it's so sad to see them all squashed on the road when people are travelling quickly to work, but it's such an easy and very pleasurable thing to do early evening when they come out of hibernation on warm, damp evenings, to actually help them. And it's toadwatch.org is all one word there. So toadwatch.org is the organisation that has the volunteers. So there we are. Thank you very much for that. And I am doing a special podcast at the moment. It's a children's podcast. I think it'll take a month or two to finish it, and toads feature very much in that indeed. So stay tuned, and we hope to have Skinner on Toad Watch before too long.
And if you'd like to email this podcast, then the email address couldn't be simpler. It's chris@countrysidepodcast.co.uk.
Wow. A military jet has just flown over the top of me. I'm doing a little bit of fencing repair quite close to Caistor St Edmund Parish Church, and pasture each side of me. It's quite a large field. It's about 30 acres, and all of a sudden the whole field I hadn't noticed, the whole field exploded with what looked like song thrashers. Perhaps 250, 300 of them, and they've all flown up into one of the pine copses here on this particular field. It's called Caister Park, and it's an amazing sight. Some are coming back down onto the ground, and it is just possible to imagine them all as song thrushes, but I know different at this time of the year. We're almost at the end of January. A buzzard just flown past, and another one sitting in a huge clump of hawthorn in an old disused quarry. Oh, that one is the one that's born here. There's two of them, two buzzards. There's rabbits in that quarry. This one I know was born at the farm. It's almost pure white. And wow, the redwing, which is what they are, they look like song thrushes, have just taken to the air and scooched off down to the bottom of the field. The whole area of woodland and the hawthorns, there's hundreds of them. And they're now perched up, many of them, in the hawthorn scrub and just peeling down onto the grassland to look for soil invertebrates. The ground's not frozen. Presumably where they come from, they've come across the North Sea, more likely than not, to spend our winter here, as it's much milder because we're quite close to the coast here. Generally, redwing, it's one of the smaller members of the thrush family, arrive here about October time, and you can sometimes see them or hear them coming in at night time, early hours of the morning. They fly over high ahead, and they've got this sort of contact call they make. They'll arrive in flocks, dozen, 50 at a time perhaps, particularly on the east coast. And what's happened is they've flown down the Western European coast, quite close to the sea, until they kind of get to the Netherlands, and then they'll fly across the North Sea. It's only 3 hours flight time if the wind's in the right direction, and then they make landfall just after midnight. And some actually make the long crossing from Scandinavia right across the North Sea and land on the east coast of Scotland. But this is typical of them at this time of the year here at the farm. We've got lots of pasture, and they have landed in October and then spread westwards across the other side of the Pennines over towards Wales, where there's far more grass over there, and it's actually a bit milder on the west side of the UK. You've got the Atlantic Ocean over there. More grassland, higher rainfall over there means it's easy for them to find food. Particularly worms is a favourite food, and of course berries as well. And then at this time of the year they're getting ready for breeding again, and they're going to move back eastwards, come across to East Anglia, which is where we are sitting, and then they'll flit back across the North Sea and make the long journey back up northern Europe, Scandinavia, even up to the Arctic tundra, where they make nests, rather like song thrush nests, except instead of lining the nest cup with just a little layer of mud, which our local song thrushes do, they do use mud on the inside of the nest, but then they have a further lining of very fine grasses. Occasionally they'll nest in the UK, but not very often. I think the most southerly nest is recorded in Kent as well, but it's quite scarce to see them. Beautiful little thrush-like birds with that russet flank, where just where the wing meets the breast there's some sort of orangey red feathers, whereas when the song thrush flies over the top of you, it's very pale beige feathers on the underside of the wings. So that's a real treat. But that buzzard is sitting on the far side, and it kind of spooked them. The buzzard's about 200 yards from me. Oh, there's some just almost behind. Oh, wow, I hadn't noticed there's a pine copse right next to me. There must be 50 within 20 yards of them. The whole ground is seething with them. It's just such a wonderful sight, and they're all hopping, little hop jerks forwards, and they're moving, and then they've just all peeled back into the mixture of sweet chestnut trees and Scots pine. And there's some people standing on the permissive walk, which comes up from Caister Church, from the Roman Town car park there, and they've got their binoculars up. And they're enjoying what I'm enjoying. That's lovely. They've all gone back up in the trees, so they're obviously, it's sort of feeding time for them. On the far side I can see rooks and jackdaws all sort of doing the same thing and looking for soil invertebrates. At this time of year it's easy feeding because the ground's not frozen, and so really lovely to see them. I think we've got about a total of 6 species of thrush. One of the smaller ones is obviously the song thrush, and these birds in front of me, oh, they're coming back out of the tree now and going right down onto the ground, some quite close to that buzzard that's just sitting on the far side of the field. So we've got song thrush, redwing, and then the other migratory one is the fieldfare. Fieldfare and redwing kind of come in together. Fieldfare are much larger, very handsome birds with a sort of greyish cap on the head and heavily speckled. I'm just leaning out of the passenger window. It's a kind of makeshift bird hide all of a sudden. Oh, and they're just peeling down by the hundreds now. I was wrong with my estimate. I reckon there's over 300 just in front of me. And the other members of the thrush family, of course, are our missel thrush, which is our largest resident thrush, similar size to the fieldfare. And then you've got the ring ouzel, which sometimes we call the northern blackbird. It has a kind of crescent moon just on the under the chin. It's sort of pale feathers, creamy yellow sometimes almost pure white, particularly on the male. And then we've got our resident blackbird as well, of course. And now they're going down on the ground. They're feeding for about a minute and a half. There's lots of horse droppings here, and some of the birds are standing on top of the horse droppings and just pecking away. The whole thing is just alive. It's just an amazing sight now. And wow, goodness, they're just peeling off across in front of me and going up into the trees and then coming back down on the ground to feed, and they're kind of feeding en masse, and that's really typical. So they're putting on weight, A, to make that crossing back over the North Sea, and B, to get into good breeding condition, particularly for the females, who they're quite early nesters, so they'll follow up right up to the Arctic tundra, Siberia as well. They'll go further Eastern Europe, and so they really do travel about quite a bit, and it's really lovely to see them. But it is confusing when if you see a field at this time of the year, if you've got pasture near where you live and it's covered in small thrush-like birds, almost certainly they're redwing. Anyway, I'd better get back to work or I'll get the sack from myself. So just astonishing to see that. Lovely. And I can see if we fish in the little compartment here, a pair of binoculars here. Should have been using those to start with. Let's just see that, if we can see that buzzard. Where is he? Yeah, there he is. He's facing me. Almost pure white, hatched here at the farm, really light coloured. I did get a video of it which went on High Ash Farm Facebook. That was during late summer, and then it's disappeared until now. It's the first time I've seen it again, but I know it's been seen regularly about 7-8 miles east of where I'm sitting at a little village called Rockland St Mary, and it's been there and it's caused a bit of a stir, but it's come right back to where it hatched, and there was another one with it which flew off. Oh, it's just the other one's just come back up out of the quarry and is sitting almost beside it. So it looks as though they're going to pair up, which would be interesting to see if we have any offspring from them. One bird is almost completely dark and very, very dark brown and speckled, and this one I'm looking at is almost pure white with a few speckles on the breast, so I'm not quite sure what the offspring will look like. It's always interesting to see what happens out in nature. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our little surprise visit from the redwing. The whole ground is covered in them. Absolutely wonderful. Off we go.